get at. So whether that's a job, or whether it's knowledge, or whether it's helping solving a problem, whatever. So bridging lets you access these outside kinds of resources. Now the other two constructs, closure and centrality, are more within the group. So closure now is the extent to which the members of the group are connected to each other through informal ties. So again, in our example here of advice giving, if everybody here regularly gives advice to everybody else, kind of an interesting situation, but that would be full closure. This group would have the maximum closure. And if nobody gave advice to anybody, they would have zero closure. And then anything in between is how you would measure closure. So if there's maybe, let's say, 6 pairs, 6 links out of a total of 100 possibilities, and that's 6 out of 100. That's a closure level or a density. We measure by density of 6%. So closure is this idea. It's sometimes related to cohesiveness. And there, the idea is that you're supporting not the access, but the utilization of resources. So the idea is you already have these resources, maybe in terms of knowledge and so forth. And for you to utilize them, though, you need a certain level of closure. You can picture it, for this, you need enough links in this network for the information and knowledge to flow around. And you can picture what happens in teams when there's communication in the team. And that's why, the successful teams are those that have high closure, because you get this flow of information and knowledge. So that's the notion of closure. David? Yes?
I think it ties back a little bit the structure of a social network is what you observe and hear. There is no a priori structure. Compared, like, for instance, to an organization chart.
Right.
In an organization.
Right.
You can point to that even before people start talking.
Right.
There's no a priori structure.
No, it's not.
Only what's observed.
It's not planned. It actually is an emergent property. It's something that happens. It's something emergent. It's not.
So there is no sense of deviating from the structure.
No,
the structure is only what you observe.
That's right. And the structure can change. Absolutely. But it's very measurable. It's just as measurable as formal organization structure. So it's not that it's some fuzzy notion. The good thing about social network analysis is we can very explicitly define it and measure it. But you're right, it emerges. It's not, there's not some priori structure. Okay, so that's closure, is 2 of the 3. The third social network structure idea is centrality. Now, centrality is the extent to which a particular individual occupies a pivotal position within the social network of the group. And there's different ways to measure centrality. We use the simplest and most popular way, which is called degree. And degree is merely how many links you have. So if you, for example, give advice to 7 of the people in this room, you have a degree of 7. And if you give advice to 9 of the people in this room, you have a degree of 9 divided by how many? Well, no. In this case, it's 9, degree of 9. Okay. So we then can say that you have greater centrality than me, because you have 9 and you have 7, relatively speaking. Okay. The idea of centrality is, again, looking at this as a network, as a flow, conduits of information and knowledge. If you're in this central pivotal position, you can have greater impact on what happens in the center. So you can be good or you can be bad. You can be helping to move the flow, helping to broker information, or you can be a bottleneck. You can be causing trouble. So we know that centrality can be good or bad, but it certainly, the theory says it makes a difference if you're highly central. In the case of teams, what the team's research has shown is when you look at the leader as the central person, there, yes, it is good. We want leaders who are central. Those tend to be related to effective teams. So those are explaining the 3 constructs. Closure and bridging are also often discussed in the context of what's called social capital theory. And that's just another branch of social network theory. It recognizes kind of the value or the capital, if you will. It's almost like thinking of financial capital and human capital. They recognize that there is social capital that is in the social network itself, as well as the assets that may be mobilized through the network. So as an individual, for example, you have an asset which represents your social network. And also, it's not just the network, it's also the who you knows, who do they know, what assets can they mobilize to help you. So that's the notion of social network. And before I get into the propositions, I'll just talk briefly about how we define networks in this context. For the closure and leader centrality propositions, a tie in the network is defined by co-participation in a single-threaded discussion in the public forums of the project. So the presumption here is that the communication around the project happens in the public forum, and we look at a threaded discussion which is started by one person can post an initial message, other people can come along and post additional messages in a kind of thread. It's kind of an online discussion. And so if two people have participated in that single discussion thread, we establish a link between them. There's a tie, conversational tie. And if a third person comes in, now all three are tied together. So that's how we define the network and the ties for these two constructs. For bridging, we use a different method. There we use membership. And the reason is that we didn't have access to conversational ties. We don't know who is talking to who from this community bridging out to other communities. But
Is this a slide? It's not good.
7.5.
7.5. It's not. It's a sneaky slide. Sorry.
How many slides are there total?
There's half slide, 25 and a half.
Poll number 25. Okay.
I rounded off.
We're not sure about the amount.
You round down to 25. Yes, I know. I thought it was important to put this in. Let me go to 7.2. That's right. 7.2. 7.65. Anyway, yeah, sorry for that, but it was a last-minute sneaky slide. So for bridging, we define the tie by membership, and this is commonly used. There's been quite a bit of studies of membership ties. It's just that for social capital theory, generally the notion is more about conversational ties. And so we recognize this might be a limitation, but we do use membership, meaning to the extent that I'm a member of other project communities, those are my ties to the outside world. And the assumption is that if I'm a member of these other communities, I'm going to tend to talk to people in those other communities. So that's how we define it there. Now we also, again, if you think of the team analogy, we have kind of three interpretations of what exactly is the team. Because we look at a project community as basically everybody who gives any meaningful participation to the project. And that basically are people who are either registered with the project, who do a lot of the code writing, or people who do participate in the public forums. So that's kind of the whole community that we can see. And on average, that's about 67 people, by the way. They're the ones we give some numbers to it. So in some respects, we might say, well, gee, the team is that whole group of 67 people. But then we say, well, but we recognize that in communities, and there's a lot of discussion about open source, that the core developers represent an important subgroup who tend to write more code, make more decisions, and so forth. And so in some cases, we say, well, you know what, maybe the team is just core. We're going to eliminate looking at these peripheral members and say, let's focus in. Maybe that's where social network structure matters. And then finally, we even dig further and say, we can also look at just the administrators and say, as a subgroup, maybe they're the team. Those are the ones among the core who are actually the leaders, who have certain rights to control access to the repository and so forth. Now, the way we define this in our study, which is pretty clean, is you are a member of the core subgroup if you're registered with the local project. If you participate in the public forum of the project, but you're not registered, you're a peripheral member. So that's basically how you see whether somebody's in the core or the peripheral. And the whole project is broken into those two groups. Now within the core, there is at least one and sometimes more administrators, and we call that a subgroup. It's kind of a subgroup of the core. And they are also registered with the project, but they're also registered as administrators. So they have the special privileges that are granted to the administrator. So that's important because we don't just create three propositions for the three social network structures. We actually try to reflect some of these characteristics of communities and bring in these different interpretations of what team means. Okay, so getting into the propositions then. For closure, you can see we actually had 3 propositions. All of them do suggest the inverted U relationship. But we have one that looks at the closure of the whole group, one that looks at the closure just of the core subgroup. So that's where we say, well, let's assume teams